So, Bjarke Ingels is an architect based in Copenhagen, but works globally. Founder of a firm called BIG in 2006. BIG, by the way, is Bjarke Ingels Group. He's an alum of the Rim Koolhaas practice, which may give you an idea a little bit about where he's coming from. Practically speaking, he does connect innovation, though, to practical solutions. He wants to bring coherence to the urban fabric and to help their occupants and users lead better lives. Interestingly, in 2011, the Wall Street Journal named him as the Innovator of the Year in Architecture. And I'm interested in a little bit more about his manifesto. His manifesto is "Yes is More." So prepare to have your minds expanded, and let's welcome our next speaker, Bjarke Ingels. Bjarke? Is he in the room?
I'm right here.
Ah, bravo! Okay, see? Very innovative. All right,
Excellent.
welcome.
Good to see you. Thanks. So, I come from the office BIG, as was just explained. We are located in Copenhagen, in the former factory of Carlsberg beer. And here in New York, we're based right above Martha Stewart. So we are like deeply rooted in the cultures of Denmark and America. And what I'd like to do is maybe to talk about the power of architecture for the next 20 minutes. Because as architects, we don't have any political power to actually decide what to do or decide that these projects should happen. And we don't have the financial power to fund them or make them realized. So we have to rely exclusively on the power of our ideas. And you say sort of in sociological studies, you look at the naturally emerging leadership happens with the individual in a group that manages to, better than anyone else, sort of capture the shared vision of every single element in the group. So if you can actually put forward practical visions that speak to the concerns and the demands of everybody in the group, you can actually acquire a certain leadership through the power of your idea. And essentially, I think architects could play a central role in trying to imagine our cities and buildings as man-made ecosystems where we channel not only the flow of people, but also the flow of resources through our cities and buildings. I like to show this as like one of the sort of indicators that there is a certain urgency to this expanded role of architecture. It was taken in Copenhagen at the United Nations Conference on Climate Change 3.5 years ago. As you can see on definitely President Obama, but I think especially President Sarkozy, it wasn't exactly a party. It was a complete failure, and none of the goals that were established for the summit were met. And the general discussion about sustainability was somehow drowning in this general misconception that sustainability is a question of how much of our current quality of life we're willing to sacrifice in order to afford becoming sustainable. So when we were asked to do a design for the Danish pavilion at the Shanghai World Expo in 2010 that was dealing with sustainable cities, we thought, what about a different take on sustainability? What if sustainable cities and buildings actually increased our quality of life? So we decided to sort of conceive of the Danish pavilion as a consolidation of a Danish streetscape, complete with the blue bicycle lanes of Copenhagen and the Copenhagen city bikes that we've had for the last 20 years. So visitors could actually experience the joy of biking through the city instead of being stuck in a traffic jam. They could also bike through the exhibition, making it the ideal museum for impatient people, because you could see everything in 3 minutes, literally. Also, our first project in Copenhagen was the Copenhagen Harbor Bath that extends public life into the water, because our harbor has become so clean you can swim in it. You don't have to sit for hours to get to the Hamptons. You can essentially jump into the Hudson. So we moved this feeling to the pavilion, allowing the visitors to feel how clean, if not how cold, Danish harbor water is. And finally, we thought, like, as sort of a common denominator between Denmark and China, how could we lure the Chinese to come and experience this? And we found in the Chinese public school curriculum, they have 3 fairy tales by Hans Christian Andersen, the Danish national poet. So they all grew up with the story of the Little Mermaid, the national symbol of Denmark. So we proposed to move the mermaid to China for 6 months, the actual mermaid. When the Nationalist Party, which would be the Danish equivalent of the Tea Party, heard about it, they freaked out and tried to pass a law against moving the mermaid. So I had to go to Parliament and argue her case. And as you can see, we got her. We even got her through Chinese customs and into the pavilion. Actually, in her absence, we invited the Chinese artist Ai Weiwei to do an installation, and he installed a Chinese surveillance camera in the pavilion that transmitted a live image to where she normally sits in Copenhagen, so that the visitors could see it, that she was okay. But also he called it the Mermaid Exchange, and it became like a loophole in the Great Firewall of China, because it was the only uncensored live TV feed from China to the rest of the world for 6 months. But essentially, the way we like to work, and I think the way that architects can work in an interesting way, is what we call knowledge-driven design, that we don't take any design decisions out of some kind of preconceived aesthetic or stylistic preference, but rather that we, through analysis of the key criteria of every single situation, we try to inform every single design decision with specific information. So in the end, the project expresses an aspect of a certain situation. And I'd like to show you a few ideas that we've been developing over the years, and try to highlight the one sort of specific insight that has informed the design. We've done a project in Copenhagen that's called The Mountain. And essentially, it's 100 apartments next to a big parking structure. And rather than having a stack of flats looking at a block of parking, we turned all of the apartments into penthouses, put them on a podium of cars, tilted it towards the south, chopped the volume up to not block the view of the neighbors. The cars occupy all of the deep spaces close to the ground, and the apartments somehow combine the splendors of a suburban lifestyle, like a house with a garden, but with a penthouse view and in a dense urban location. So you literally have these houses with gardens where your kids can run out and play. And it's made possible because they're lifted up on a base of parking. A single funicular elevator gives access to all of the apartments. The facade of the parking is perforated to make it naturally ventilated and naturally illuminated. But because the holes look dark on the bright aluminum, from a distance it turns into a gigantic urban artwork for free. And essentially what makes the building look different is also what makes it perform, that it makes it breathe and brings in daylight. And this sort of idea of what we call architectural alchemy, that by mixing traditional ingredients in unusual mixtures, you can actually create, if not gold, then at least added value. We also pursued in a project called the 8 House, that's on the city limits in this new part of town in Copenhagen, built next to the subway line. It's literally where humanity stops and cattle takes over. And essentially we try, like, when you're building a new neighborhood from scratch, how do you give it the richness and the diversity of a historical city? Shops and offices, they like to be close to the customers, so we put them on the ground. Residential goes higher up, and because residential floor plates are less deep than commercial floor plates, we get space for a small path, like little gardens and almost like townhouses. Then we add a layer of more classic apartments and then penthouse townhouses on top. The master plan asks for a shortcut through the block, so we turn it into a figure 8, creating these little squares that connect through the block. And finally, offices and commercial programs, they like daylight, but they hate glare and sunshine. They spend energy on cooling. So to the south, we lower them to the ground, and to the north, we create 4-story office buildings, but also lifting up the townhouses into the sun and the view. And sort of in reverse, in the sort of southwest corner, we open up the entire courtyard to face the view of the landscape. And as a result, we short-circuit the path that moves along the townhouses. Is actually connected, and you can actually walk and bicycle all the way to the penthouse. So you can say where social life is traditionally restricted to occurring at the street level, here it's really invited to invade the three-dimensional space of the urban block. Where the 8 house crosses itself, we sort of connected all of the amenities into a social atrium that ties all of the spaces of the 8 house together from the ground to the roof terrace. And essentially, it really becomes like a man-made extension of the otherwise completely horizontal geometry of the landscape of Copenhagen. So this idea that you can actually analyze the different needs of the different programs and use these differences towards synergies that can create a more lively and interesting city. I normally get the objection that this only works in socialist Scandinavia, but we were actually invited by the Durst organization here in New York to look at a site on West 57th Street in Hell's Kitchen. And it's a wonderful site. It's overlooking the Hudson, but it's also sandwiched between a power plant, a sanitation garage, and the West Side Highway. So we thought they really need like an oasis in the middle of Hell's Kitchen. And you can say this is the courtyard building that my dad grew up in Copenhagen. And in a way, the European courtyard is at the architectural scale what Central Park is at the urban scale, an oasis in the middle of the city. So we said, like, what happens when you combine the density of a Manhattan skyscraper with the communal space of the European courtyard? Or essentially, what could a court scraper look like? So we placed the courtyard next to the Helena. It's not only owned by the Durst, but also named after Douglas Durst's daughter. So we don't block any of the Helena's views. And then to add the density, we raised the northeast corner to 470 feet, still allowing the courtyard and the apartments to enjoy the sunshine and the view, creating this like rather striking new silhouette on the west side waterfront of Manhattan. From the east, it becomes more like a spire, and when you enter, you have this courtyard space that has the same proportions as Central Park, only it's 15,000 times smaller. And all of the apartments actually have views over the water and the Hudson. So it's currently under construction, and in December 2015, it should be a new part of the silhouette of Manhattan. So you can say, like, of course, in this case, we're like right next to all these different pieces of infrastructure, a power plant, a sanitation garage, and a highway. In Vancouver, we're doing a project where Granville Bridge touches downtown, and the different bridges have sliced this piece of land into unusable triangles. And our client was Westbank out of Vancouver, was frustrated by the fact that it was like ruining his real estate. So we started analyzing the different requirements, the setbacks from the streets, the setbacks from the bridges. Another setback, which is a 100 feet setback, because the city wants to ensure that nobody looks straight into heavy traffic. Finally, we're not allowed to cast shadows into the neighboring park, and we are left with a 6,000 square foot triangle, almost too small to develop. But then we thought, if the 100-foot setback has to do with ensuring a minimum distance, when we get 100 feet up in the air, we can actually come back out and reclaim the area that's lost and maximize the amount of the nicest apartments. It's almost like a flower that grows out of a dense situation and then sort of expands as it reaches the sky. It's almost as if someone is pulling a curtain aside. Also, underneath the bridge, we're trying to create a lively community with shops and restaurants, and we're trying to turn the underside of the bridge into something exciting. In Vancouver, they actually have a lot of like really interesting photo artists. And together with Rodney Graham, we're looking at turning the underside of the bridge into sort of a street version of the Sixteen's Chapel. So essentially a space where all of the artwork is above you rather than on the walls around you. And you can say this idea of trying to transform the infrastructure of the past into the cultural and social space of the present, we've sort of pursued in other examples. Next to Prince Hamlet's Castle Kronborg, we're doing the Maritime Museum of Denmark. It's located inside of a decommissioned dry dock. We thought it was going to be this claustrophobic underground museum. So we thought instead of filling the dock with museum, Why couldn't we wrap the museum around it, leave the dock as a gigantic courtyard that actually brings daylight underground? So you can actually see the architecture of the dock where they used to build ships. A series of bridges gives connections for the exhibitions, for auditoria, for restaurants, and brings daylight into the exhibitions. We even were able to build the bridges on shipyards, so in a way the museum about shipping is actually built out of the industry that it's devoted to portray. So essentially this example where like structures of the past can actually be reinvented for cultural purposes of the present. Preparing this presentation, I realized that everything we're doing in Copenhagen is underground for some reason. We're doing a sports hall underneath the courtyard of my old high school, and that's because we had run out of space. So the only other place to put it would be on the sports fields, but that would cancel outdoor soccer, and that's like the national sport of Denmark. Instead we put it in like a molehill underneath the courtyard. And we got the commission from my old math teacher. The architecture of the hall is actually based on the mathematical formula for a thrown handball, like a ballistic arch. So essentially, the beautiful curvature of the glulam beams above actually portray the exact geometry of the sport itself. And upstairs, suddenly this lump becomes like a giant furniture that has actually sort of tripled the use of the courtyard, because it really is this sort of big, accommodating, friendly entity that is suddenly a part of the courtyard. You can see public participation is a major aspect of our work, no matter if we're privately or publicly commissioned. We're doing a big public space in Copenhagen. That's a former train line, and it's in the middle of the most socially diverse neighborhood in all of Denmark. There's more than 60 different nationalities living there, and ownership and integration was going to be a major part of the project. So I'm only going to explain one aspect, but essentially there's what we call the red square, where everything is shades of red, the black market, where everything is black, and finally the green park. But within this, instead of plastering it with Danish design, we reached out to the local community, asking all of the different people with different cultural backgrounds to nominate elements from their other home country, because it would be strange if the Danes had made the only nice bench or the only nice fountain. And the basic idea is like, we don't eat Chinese food to be nice to the Chinese. It's simply because sometimes we want noodles or spring rolls or something. And we haven't placed a Moroccan fountain in the middle of this space to be nice to the Moroccans, but because they have an amazing history or tradition of architectural water features. So now we have this Moroccan fountain. We have a Thai boxing arena, obviously from Thailand, elements from New Delhi, Iraq, of course litter boxes from Great Britain. It's Denmark, so you need a lot of like bicycle racks. You have bollards from Ghana. The sign on the red square is an actual sign from the red square. We found an elephant plaything in Ukraine. It's actually from Chernobyl, so we had to make a copy because the original was radioactive. We know even down to the manhole covers are from different cities like Paris, Basel. And because a lot of the immigrants have an Islamic background, we found an element from Israel that is virtually indestructible, this nice manhole cover. We even found palm trees in China that grow in Danish climate. The octopus gathers all of the different children from the different backgrounds. It becomes like a display of the sort of integrated potential of play. And when you look at the benches, it's also a display of the different cultures of the different countries. A Mexican bench, like a love seat, where you look the person you're sitting next to into the eyes. A Belgian bench where everybody looks away from each other. So you have like these sort of almost like a safari of urban cultural diversity. Finally, one of the main reminders that you're in a foreign country when you're traveling is the advertisement. So we actually have these neon signs as big sculptural lamps that advertise stuff you cannot buy in Denmark. This is obviously America. Qatar, it's a dentist. And the red square has these nice former socialist advertisement. We made an app so you can also get the stories of where the different objects are from and who proposed them. That brings me to the last idea that somehow sums up the different elements. Our biggest project today was that we were commissioned by the 10 municipalities of metropolitan Copenhagen to look at a master plan for 2047 and looking at tying the different peripheral municipalities together with a new train line. And we thought, if we're looking at the future of Copenhagen, we can't just look at Copenhagen or the outskirts, or even Denmark, because right on the other side we have Sweden. We have some of the, like on both sides of the water, we have the most prosperous regions in Scandinavia. And by adding a small 3-mile bridge to the north, we can actually create a single metropolitan loop where no area is further away than 45 minutes by public transportation. It also sort of consolidates the most prosperous industries in the region. By making a binational master plan, we can also introduce pink in a Scandinavian flag for the first time. But essentially, it has the same area as the San Francisco Bay Area. So as an urban entity, it's a rather well-known quantity. And the main idea is this is not just going to be infrastructure for trains or for cars. It's going to be a smart grid for the power that combines the sort of hydroelectricity of Sweden with the wind power of Denmark. It's going to be a waste management system, a water management system. And in general, the infrastructural investments are always tied together with investments into like urban development, education, and industry. And as a specific example of this integration of infrastructure and social space is the first project that we're building right now in Copenhagen. It might be the landmark of Copenhagen in the future, but it's not a royal palace or a cultural palace. It's a power plant that turns waste into electricity and heating. And in Denmark, we have snow. It's a cold climate, but we have no mountains. But we do have mountains of trash. So Copenhageners happily go 6 hours by car to Branes in the south of Sweden. And because of the sheer magnitude of this power plant, we can actually put 2/3 of Branes on the top of the power plant. So we proposed this in the competition. Miraculously, we won the competition based on this idea. And we recently broke ground. So from 2016, you're going to have to look out for the Danish competitors in alpine skiing, because now we can actually practice at home. So you can say with this project, we're coming quite close to this idea of trying to make cities as man-made ecosystems. Because together with the city of Copenhagen, the power plant actually forms an urban metabolism where the waste turns into energy and heating. This is going to be the cleanest waste-to-energy power plant in the world. So the smoke that comes out of the chimney is completely non-toxic. That's why you can ski on the roof of it, and that's why it can actually become a public park. But it still emits a small amount of CO2. So together with an artist group, Realities United out of Berlin, we designed the chimney in such a way that it accumulates CO2, and when it has 500 kilos, it puffs a gigantic smoke ring. And of course, on one hand, we like that it's like the ultimate artistic expression of hedonistic sustainability. Something that used to be a problem becomes something playful. But I think back to this idea of knowledge-driven design, one of the main drivers of behavioral change is knowledge, that if people don't know, they can't act. And the problem about CO2 emissions is that it's so abstract, nobody gets what it is. So from 2016, if you want to know what is 1 ton of CO2, all you have to do is look at the sky, and each time you count 2 smoke rings, we just emitted 1 ton of CO2. And in a way, I like this idea that by projecting the carbon footprint of the city onto its sky, everybody becomes like literally aware of the consequences of the actions they're taking. So this was a handful of ideas of how like architecture could somehow be integrated in different ways of developing smarter and more lively cities of the future.